My name is Tim Shiell. I'm a professor of philosophy at the University of Wisconsin-Stout. I'm the founder and past director of the Center for Applied Ethics and the founder and director of the Civil Liberty-focused Menard Center for the Study of Institutions and Innovation. I'm a free speech scholar and activist with books on the philosophy of law, campus hate speech, African Americans and the First Amendment, and civil liberties more generally. I'm especially interested in the relationship between robust free speech rights and progress and equality for members of historically marginalized communities. The title of my talk today is Free Speech for We, Anti-Orthodoxy and Inclusion in the First Amendment. In the presentation, I'd like to propose a new twist in the justification for freedom of expression. A twist that I think better explains the justification for robust expressive rights and illuminates how and why robust expressive rights help promote and protect greater equality. The idea is inspired by an argument law professor Nan Hunter makes in an Ohio State University Law Journal article back in 2000. She argues that the ideas of anti-orthodoxy and inclusion help bridge the gap. That is the perceived conflict between robust free speech rights and greater equality. In brief, her thesis is that although the free speech and greater equality may conflict in individual cases, free speech and equality are united at a fundamental level because both protect and promote anti-orthodoxy and inclusion. Examples of this inseparability of robust expressive rights and greater equality include the landmark Supreme Court decisions in Edwards v. South Carolina in 1963 and Brown v. Louisiana in 1966. In both cases, peaceful civil rights protesters were convicted under breach of the peace laws for expressive activity. Edwards involved Black student civil rights marchers in a demonstration at the state capitol, and the Brown case involved Black student civil rights sit-ins. In both cases, the court overturned the convictions by expanding constitutional protections for expressive activity under the free speech, freedom of assembly, and right to petition clauses of the First Amendment. Now, I want to go beyond Hunter's thesis to explore how anti-orthodoxy and inclusion relate to the justifications for robust expressive rights. My suggestion is that the values of anti-orthodoxy and inclusion underpin and unite the standard justifications for robust expressive rights. And they are evident in the landmark Supreme Court decisions, first recognizing expressive protections in the 1920s and 1930s, and then expanding those protections from the 1940s to today. Of course, the full explication of the argument would exceed the limitations of this presentation. So in this presentation, I just want to pique your interest by introducing the basic premises, the basic steps of the argument. So the first step is to explain briefly what robust expressive activity is. Robust free speech has gray areas to be sure, but at its core, it is the default position that expressive activity should be protected from government censorship and suppression, and that government must meet a high bar of evidence to justify censorship and suppression. I'll often use the term expressive activity because the issues go beyond the free speech clause to include freedom of religion, freedom of the press, freedom of assembly, and the right to petition government for redress of grievances, as well as the implicit First Amendment right of association recognized in the court's 1958 NAACP v. Alabama decision. Let me give you a couple examples. So robust expressive rights typically protect offensive, uncivil, satirical, and even hateful expression, but they do not protect, for example, true threats, libel, or extortion. Moreover, robust expressive rights require that in order for expression to count as a true threat, libel, or extortion, the expression must meet factual and doctrinal conditions, and the relevant law itself must avoid overbreadth and undue vagueness. Robust expressive rights also allow government to establish time, place, and manner restrictions But typically, these restrictions also must meet a high bar. Typically, the restrictions must be based on a legitimate government purpose, be content and viewpoint neutral, and allow for alternative methods of expression. So, for example, a city cannot ban abortion protesters from demonstrating outside an abortion clinic, but it can require protesters to not obstruct local traffic and clinic clients. Another example, a politician can sue a newspaper for libel, but as a public figure subject to vigorous criticism, the politician must show the falsehood is actually false, cause demonstrable reputational, economic, or other harm to them, and was made with actual malice. And that's a very high bar to meet. So, second step of the argument. Why should expressive rights be robust like this? Why should the default position be to protect expression, and why should such a high bar be set for government restriction of expression? Well, Thomas I. Emerson, the greatest First Amendment scholar of his generation, and an excellent constitutional litigator, set the plate for this discussion in two of his major works, Toward a General Theory of the First Amendment, which came out in 1966, and A System of Freedom of Expression, which was published in 1970. There, Professor Emerson draws on the previous work of free speech icons such as John Milton, John Stuart Mill, Alexander Meiklejohn, and many others, to explain four justifications for robust expressive rights. So first, they are essential to a healthy democracy. They're essential to a healthy democracy because citizens in a healthy democracy must be able to criticize and lampoon government officials, protest and lobby against laws and policies they disagree with, read and listen to opposing views to learn the pros and cons of political candidates and proposed laws, and so forth. In short, censorship stifles democracy. Second, they are essential to the attainment of individual self-realization. Self-realization or self-fulfillment requires the individual to express their views, to join in association with others, be exposed to other views, to criticize other views, to persuade others to their own view, and so forth, even when their views are unpopular, marginalized, loathed, or even thought to be fraught with death, to use Justice Oliver Wendell Holmes Jr.'s phrase in his 1917 dissent in Abrams v. United States. So, in short, censorship stifles individual self-realization. Third, robust expressive rights promote the pursuit and attainment of knowledge and truth. Innovation and progress in ethical norms, politics and law, science, business, technology, and so forth is best achieved in an open society protecting a vigorous contest of ideas. As John Stuart Mill pointed out in his famous monograph on liberty, quote, "The particular evil of silencing the expression of opinion is that it is robbing the human race, posterity, as well as the existing generation, those who dissent from the opinion still more than those who hold it. If the opinion is right, they are deprived of the opportunity of exchanging error for truth. If wrong, what they lose is almost as great a benefit, the clearer perception and livelier impression of truth produced by its collision with error," close quote. So in short, censorship stifles knowledge and truth and their fruits, innovation and progress. So fourth, robust expressive rights provide the basis for a balance between social stability on one side and social change on the other side. They do that because they allow minorities, dissidents, malcontents, and the like to challenge the status quo and pursue change through peaceful methods. Censorship forces dissidents, the marginalized, to seek change through violence and revolution. So now the third step of the argument. How are these justifications related to anti-orthodoxy and inclusion? So first, consider the democracy justification for robust expressive rights. Historically, the robust use of speech, press, religion, assembly, petition, and association strengthened our democracy by playing a critical role in, some examples, ending slavery, extending rights to the freed slaves, expanding rights to women, bringing down Jim Crow laws, and far more. Expressive rights play a critical role in facilitating and protecting democracy by informing the public of the pros and cons of political candidates and policies, exposing government hypocrisy and misdeeds. In short, robust expressive activity expanded and strengthened our democracy by challenging and overcoming orthodoxies and increasing political, economic, social, racial, religious inclusiveness. What about self-realization? How is self-realization connected to anti-orthodoxy and inclusion? Well, robust expressive rights enable people as individuals or in association with others to develop their thoughts and abilities, to be exposed to and learn from competing thoughts and abilities, to criticize, debate, or persuade others, and so forth. Since individuals in associations inevitably have different perspectives and ambitions, robust expressive rights protect and promote everyone's pursuit of self-realization, even those who are marginalized or dissidents or radicals. Now, self-realization has value independently of any benefits to others, but it does have social benefits too. Marginalized, dissident, and radical pursuing their self-realization have contributed in myriad ways to the common good throughout history. Moving on to the third justification, the pursuit and attainment of knowledge and truth, I think we can readily see the connection to anti-orthodoxy and inclusion. History is filled with ignorance, prejudices, falsehoods, overcome or at least reduced through robust expressive activity. The struggle for truth, especially in politics and ethics, can be long and difficult. The great Frederick Douglass noted in his famous 1857 West India Emancipation speech in Canandaigua, New York, quote, "Power concedes nothing without a demand, and never did, and it never will. Find out just what any people will quietly submit to, and you have found the exact measure of injustice and wrong which will be imposed upon them. And these will continue till they are resisted with either words or blows or with both. The limits of tyrants are prescribed by the endurance of those whom they oppress." Close quotes. A few examples of the long struggle for truth include the abolitionist defeat of slavery, overcoming overbroad Comstockian obscenity restrictions, eliminating Jim Crow laws, expanding rights to women, providing civil rights protections to racial, religious, ethnic minorities, expanding rights to the LGBT community, and much more. All of these required contesting and overcoming orthodoxies. All were intended to, and actually succeeded in increasing inclusion. Let's consider how anti-orthodoxy and inclusion relate to a balance between social stability on the one hand and social change on the other. Again, the connection seems apparent. Protecting the expressive rights of political, racial, ethnic, religious minorities provides an avenue for them to be included in political and social debate and activities and movements, and to seek to change objectionable orthodoxies. Whereas the denial of robust expressive rights strips them of the ability to openly challenge orthodoxy and excludes them from political and social activities, movements, and debates. They are left to consort in secret to plot violence and revolution. Now, none of this is meant to suggest that robust expressive rights are a panacea or inevitably lead to truth and justice. Robust expressive rights have drawbacks and problems. For example, robust expressive rights sometimes protect harmful speech. Moreover, the burdens of robust expression too often fall heaviest on minorities and the marginalized. So too, robust expressive rights sometimes protect pernicious conspiracy theories, as well as political disinformation and misinformation. So my point is not that robust expressive rights are an unmitigated good. Rather, my point is that the denial of robust expressive rights makes progress towards greater equality even more difficult, even more challenging than it is with robust expressive rights. Handing greater authority to censor and suppress ideas to the powers that be is not an effective strategy for those who seek greater equality in an unequal society. I just want to very briefly note that there isn't time for me to get to 5 further justifications for robust expressive rights that are discussed by Kent Greenwald in his 1989 Columbia Law Review article, and how those too are tied to anti-orthodoxy and inclusion. That will have to wait for another occasion. So on to the final step of the argument. So consider 3 major Supreme Court landmark decisions that demonstrate the role of anti-orthodoxy and inclusion in robust expressive rights. Anti-orthodoxy and inclusion are not abstract theoretical concepts that only exist in the ivory tower or pie in the sky. They are vibrant feet on the ground values that animate tremendously important, concrete, real-life decisions. So my first example comes from the 1930s, a time when modern protections for First Amendment rights for robust expression didn't exist. Actually, the law protected very little expression at the time, and whether the law would change to protect more expression was not at all clear. So, during the worst of the Great Depression, a young black communist labor organizer named Angelo Herndon led a biracial protest march to Atlanta City Hall demanding relief for the poor. City leaders tracked Herndon down and had him convicted in a kangaroo trial of inciting insurrection based primarily on him possessing communist literature in his home. His appeal to the United States Supreme Court in Herndon v. Georgia in 1935 failed. The court majority mistakenly upheld his conviction on a technicality involving when a constitutional question was raised in the legal process. Fortunately, Herndon's lawyers were able to initiate another legal proceeding, and on his second trip to the Supreme Court in 1937, the court reversed. In Herndon v. Lowry, they struck down his conviction on the merits of the case. This is the first time the court used the clear and present danger test to actually protect speech. It was the first time they protected communist expression, and it was the first time they protected an African American's expression. It was a slam dunk for anti-orthodoxy and inclusion. Second example comes from the same era. You know, it's another one of these reversals during the turbulent early days of the First Amendment. In 1940, the Supreme Court held in Minersville School District v. Gobitis that public schools could require students to salute the flag and recite the Pledge of Allegiance, even Jehovah's Witness students who refused to do so on deeply held religious grounds. However, that decision spurred a nationwide assault on Jehovah's Witnesses so vicious that the Supreme Court reversed that decision just 3 years later in West Virginia State Board of Education v. Barnett. That decision produced one of the most important and iconic constitutional declarations the court has ever produced, a declaration emphasizing anti-orthodoxy and inclusion are part and parcel of robust expressive rights. And I quote Justice Robert Jackson, who wrote the opinion. If there is any fixed star in our constitutional constellation, it is that no official, high or petty, can prescribe what shall be orthodox in politics, nationalism, religion, or other matters of opinion, or force citizens to confess by word or act their faith therein. Close quote. So my final example is New York Times v. Sullivan, decided in 1964. The case involved a libel action brought by the notorious L.B. Sullivan, who was the segregationist police commissioner of Montgomery, Alabama. A full-page ad in the newspaper criticized the Montgomery police for their treatment of civil rights protesters. It included some minor factual errors. Although Sullivan was not named in the ad, he sued the newspaper for libel. To no one's surprise, Southern courts found in Sullivan's favor and awarded him the full $500,000 he demanded. And it sparked an onslaught of similar libel lawsuits across the South. Now, it has to be noted that under existing libel law, Sullivan had a pretty strong case. However, the Supreme Court overturned the judgment and created modern libel law by holding that the robust exchange of political and social commentary required some room for mistakes and requiring the falsehoods involving public figures be made with actual malice. There is no doubt in looking at the history of the case that the court was acting to protect rights movement's ability to challenge Jim Crow orthodoxy in the South and to end segregationist exclusions. I'm going to quick emphasize, these three cases are just the tip of the iceberg. There's literally hundreds more examples that could be discussed involving the civil rights movement, religious minorities, and much more. So time to wrap up. In brief, I believe anti-orthodoxy and inclusion play an underappreciated but essential role in the justification for robust expressive rights, a role that too many supporters of greater equality have forgotten. Retreating from robust expressive rights will inhibit progress toward greater equality rather than enhance progress towards greater equality. So thank you for listening. Please feel free to contact me. I'd love to hear your questions and thoughts about the role of anti-orthodoxy and inclusion in the justification of robust expressive rights.